The city never slept. Its towers touched the clouds, its streets were always alive, and money flowed like a restless river. Among its glitter and speed lived a man who seemed to own the rhythm of the city itself. His name was Adrian Cole, a billionaire tycoon whose empire stretched from luxury hotels to private airlines. People whispered his name with awe and fear. His arrival at any event turned heads, his decisions shifted markets, and his smile, rare as it was, could decide the fate of men. But behind his iron confidence and polished shoes, there was emptiness. He ate alone at the grand dining table of his mansion. He rode in sleek cars that hummed like machines of another world, yet the silence inside them echoed louder than any applause. Success had given him everything except peace. At his side, day after day, stood a woman who knew his calendar better than his family name. Her name was Grace. She was 30, modestly dressed, never seeking attention, and yet she carried a quiet strength that no wealth could imitate. She typed his letters, arranged his meetings, and reminded him of his medicine when his migraines returned. Her presence was constant, her loyalty unquestionable. Adrian's colleagues admired her efficiency. To him, she was indispensable, but Grace never spoke much about herself. Her answers were short when asked about her evenings. She avoided personal conversations, focusing always on her duties. No one thought much of it, not even Adrian, until the day he noticed something strange. But before that moment of suspicion arrived, there was a day that revealed how deeply their worlds contrasted. It was a cold morning when Adrian stepped out of his mansion, adjusting his tie, as his driver held the car door open. The neighborhood was silent, except for the soft hum of sprinklers and the purr of the car engine. As he slid into the leather seat, he caught a glimpse of Grace arriving on foot. Her shoes were worn, her coat too thin for the cold, but her face bore the same calm expression it always did. She offered a polite smile, apologizing for being a minute late, though Adrian had not even noticed the time. "Grace, you should get yourself a car," Adrian said, adjusting his watch. "It is embarrassing for my secretary to arrive walking." Grace lowered her gaze. "Cars are expensive, sir. The bus works fine for me." Adrian's brows drew together, not out of sympathy, but out of confusion. To him, a car was a necessity, as basic as air. To her, it was a luxury too high to imagine. The silence stretched, and it did not press further. At the office, Grace moved through her tasks with precision. She balanced calls, prepared documents, and even when clients shouted at her over missed appointments that were never her fault, she responded with composure. Yet sometimes, Adrian caught her staring into space, as if her mind had wandered into places too heavy for her to share. One evening, as he was leaving the office, Adrian saw her clutching her phone tightly, whispering into it with urgency. Her voice trembled. "Yes, I will bring the medicine. Please, just wait for me." When she noticed Adrian approaching, she quickly ended the call and forced a smile. "Good night, sir." Adrian nodded, but something inside him shifted. It was the first time he saw her mask crack, revealing a glimpse of struggle. At night, as he sat alone at his marble table, his mind returned to her words, medicine, the tremble in her voice, the way she avoided eye contact. For the first time in years, curiosity stirred in him, not about a market trend, not about an investment deal, but about the quiet woman who sat across from him each day. Why did she look burdened when she thought no one was watching? Why did she hide her life so carefully? Adrian poured himself another glass of wine, staring at the untouched meal before him. The city outside glittered, but he could not stop hearing Grace's trembling voice. He had built empires by following instincts, and now that same instinct whispered that his secretary carried a secret that might shake the walls of his certainty. Little did Adrian know that what he was about to uncover would not only leave him in tears, but also change the course of his life forever. One evening, as he was leaving the office, Adrian noticed Grace lingering at her desk long after everyone else had gone. The lights overhead cast pale circles on the polished floor, and the sound of her pen scratching paper was the only noise in the vast room. She looked up suddenly, startled by his presence, and slid a folder into her bag with unusual haste. "Still here?" Adrian asked, his voice calm but probing. "Yes, sir. Just finishing some paperwork," she replied, forcing a smile. But Adrian's sharp eyes caught the tremor in her hand. He said nothing more, though the scene etched itself into his mind. The next day, she arrived with shadows beneath her eyes, as if she had not slept. She avoided his gaze during the morning briefing, her tone softer than usual. When her phone vibrated on the table, she quickly silenced it, glancing nervously at the screen before slipping it back into her bag. Adrian leaned back in his chair, pretending to scan the report she had handed him, but his mind was far from the numbers. What is she hiding? By afternoon, his suspicion grew. He sent her on an errand that could have easily been handled by another assistant, just to observe her reaction. She hesitated, almost as though the request interfered with something urgent of her own. Still, she obeyed, leaving swiftly with her coat clutched tightly around her. Later that evening, Adrian stood by his office window, watching the city lights flicker like stars scattered across the dark. Down on the street, he spotted her walking quickly, clutching a small paper bag. Instead of heading toward the bus stop, she turned into a side alley that led away from the main road. "Strange," he muttered to himself. His driver looked at him through the rearview mirror but said nothing. The following days revealed more peculiar patterns. Grace left the office precisely at the same time each evening, never staying for casual conversation with colleagues. She always carried something, sometimes medicine bags, sometimes groceries, sometimes books. She never took taxis, never rode with friends, and never accepted offers for a lift. Adrian began to notice other details too. Once, when she bent to pick up a dropped pen, he saw her shoes were frayed at the edges. Another time, as she stretched to place a file on a high shelf, her blouse sleeve slipped back to reveal a faint bruise on her wrist. When he asked, she quickly covered it and laughed it off. The puzzle gnawed at him. He could not focus on meetings. He found himself studying her movements instead of contracts. She was reliable, dedicated, and respectful, yet there was a part of her life sealed away like a locked door. One evening, as rain lashed against the tall glass windows of his office, he overheard her whispering again into her phone. Her voice carried desperation. "Please, I am trying. I will bring the money tomorrow. Just give me one more day." The words froze him. He had never heard Grace speak with such fear. When she turned and saw him watching, she quickly ended the call and lowered her head. "Everything all right?" he asked, his tone sharper than intended. "Yes, sir. Just a personal matter," she murmured, avoiding his eyes. That night, Adrian lay awake in his vast bedroom, the silence heavier than ever. He had trusted her with his schedule, his private letters, even his health. And yet, she lived a life he knew nothing about. Curiosity had always been his weapon in business. It led him to opportunities others missed. Now, that same instinct whispered to him that his secretary carried a secret far heavier than he imagined. Adrian made a decision. He would no longer remain a distant observer. He would follow her. And what he discovered, he thought grimly, might change everything. Adrian sat in his glass-walled office, a panoramic view of the city stretching endlessly before him. From this height, everything looked orderly, calm, and within his control. Yet, something gnawed at him, something he couldn't quite explain. Grace, his secretary, had always been the model of professionalism, punctual, efficient, and unfailingly polite. But recently, her behavior had begun to chip away at the picture-perfect image he thought he knew. He remembered the night he offered to drop her home after an exhausting late meeting. She had stiffened, thanked him quickly, and slipped out before he could insist. Another time during a corporate dinner, she excused herself with a vague explanation, her phone buzzing nonstop under the table. Adrian had noticed the way her hands trembled as she tucked it away, eyes darting as though she was carrying a secret too heavy to bear. The billionaire was not a man accustomed to curiosity. He had people report to him, not the other way around. His world was carefully arranged, so he never needed to wonder. But Grace's guardedness unsettled him. Why did she refuse offers that most would see as golden opportunities? Why did she vanish into the night without a trace, as if the world outside the office belonged to a different, hidden version of her? That evening, as the office lights dimmed and his staff filed out, Adrian remained by the window. The city glowed below, a restless sea of headlights and voices. He thought about Grace walking somewhere among them, burdened by something she wouldn't speak of. For the first time in years, he felt a pull stronger than his pride, a need to know. He tried to dismiss it. She's just an employee. Her life is her own. Yet the thought clung stubbornly, whispering back, but what if she's in trouble? What if the weight she carries is heavier than she can bear? The conflict grew inside him. Logic urged restraint. But his heart, so rarely consulted, had already decided. He wanted, no needed, to see the truth with his own eyes. The next day, Adrian found himself doing something wildly out of character. He arrived earlier than usual, not for a meeting, but to watch. When Grace walked in, neatly dressed as always, he studied her closely. Beneath the crisp blazer and collected expression, there was something else. Fatigue, in the way she rubbed her wrist, shadows under her eyes that no amount of makeup could mask. She smiled when their eyes met, yet it didn't reach her soul. That evening, when she gathered her things and headed for the door, Adrian waited a few moments before slipping out behind her. His expensive shoes clicked against marble floors, an odd contrast to the secrecy of his mission. For once, he wasn't the billionaire commanding attention. He was just a man, trailing quietly, pulse quickening with every step. Grace moved quickly, weaving through the bustling streets. Adrian followed at a distance, his chauffeur left behind for fear of being noticed. He blended into the crowd as best he could, though his tailored suit and polished demeanor made him stand out against the rush of ordinary lives. Still, he pressed on, curiosity sharpening into something heavier, concern. She didn't head toward the polished suburbs or trendy districts where he imagined she might live. Instead, she boarded a crowded bus. Adrian hesitated at first. He hadn't set foot on public transport in years, but forced himself on, keeping his head low, standing among strangers. The smell of rain-soaked jackets and worn-out shoes around him, he felt a discomfort he hadn't known in decades. Yet it grounded him. This was Grace's world, not his. With each passing stop, the scenery outside the window changed. Glass towers gave way to crumbling facades. Neon lights dimmed into flickering bulbs. The city's glossy surface peeled back, revealing something rawer, more real. Grace got off in a neighborhood Adrian had only ever driven past with tinted windows rolled high. Heart pounding, he stepped off too, careful not to draw her attention. The streets here were narrow, uneven, filled with vendors closing up shop and children running barefoot across puddles. Grace walked with purpose, her pace quick, as though she were racing against time. And still, Adrian followed. He didn't know where this path would lead, but a certainty had already settled in his chest. He was about to learn something that would change the way he saw her and himself forever. The night air was heavy, carrying the scent of dust, smoke, and food, frying in roadside stalls. Adrian trailed Grace at a cautious distance, his eyes never leaving her slight figure as she navigated the dimly lit streets with practiced familiarity. To him, this world was alien. Broken sidewalks, cracked paint peeling from walls, and neon signs blinking with stubborn life. Everything here contrasted sharply with the pristine glass towers and polished marble floors that defined his existence. He pulled his coat tighter around him, uneasy not because of the place itself, but because of the realization it forced upon him. He had never truly walked these streets. His fortune had kept him shielded, transported from luxury car to penthouse to office boardroom. But tonight, he wasn't a billionaire tycoon. Tonight, he was just a man chasing after a mystery. Grace turned down a narrow alley, her heels clattering against uneven stone. Adrian hesitated, a knot tightening in his chest. The alley was dim, lit only by a single flickering bulb. Every instinct told him he didn't belong here, that this wasn't his world. Yet something deeper compelled him forward. From the shadows, he watched as she approached a rusted metal door and knocked softly, glancing around as though afraid of being seen. The door creaked open, and for a brief moment, Adrian saw what looked like a child's face peeking out. Grace whispered something, her voice too low for him to catch, and slipped inside. Adrian's breath caught. A child? What was she doing here? He waited several long minutes, torn between retreating and pressing forward. Finally, unable to resist, he edged closer and peered through a crack in the doorframe. The sight inside rooted him to the ground. The building was nothing more than an abandoned warehouse, its windows covered in plastic sheets, its walls bare concrete. But within, Grace was kneeling on the floor, her blazer folded neatly beside her. She cradled a young boy, no older than 10, who clung to her desperately, his face streaked with tears and dirt. A frail woman lay on a thin mattress nearby, coughing weakly into her hand. Grace brushed the boy's hair gently, whispering words of comfort Adrian couldn't hear, her face softening in a way he had never seen in the office. He felt the weight of realization slam into him. Grace wasn't cold or distant. She wasn't hiding out of indifference. She was hiding because her world was heavy with responsibility, one she carried quietly and alone. Adrian pressed a hand to the wall, steadying himself. He had expected. He didn't know what exactly. Maybe a scandal, maybe betrayal, but not this. Not Grace sacrificing every ounce of herself for the sake of others, while never once asking for help. His chest ached as he remembered her tired smiles, the way she deflected compliments, the shadows beneath her eyes. She wasn't just working for herself. Every late night, every early morning, it was all for them, for this boy, for this frail woman, for a family she was trying to hold together with the strength of her will alone. A sudden noise snapped him back. Someone had stepped into the alley behind him. Adrian straightened, his pulse racing. Two men leaned against the wall, their eyes narrowing at the sight of him. An obviously out-of-place man in an expensive suit. One muttered something in a language Adrian didn't understand, and they laughed. He turned away quickly, his instinct screaming to leave before drawing unwanted attention. But as he glanced back toward the warehouse, he saw Grace emerge again, now carrying a bag of groceries in one hand and holding the boy's hand with the other. Her movements were brisk, careful, her face alert. She passed by him without noticing, too focused on shielding the child from the roughness of the street. Adrian followed once more, this time his steps slower, heavier. Each block they walked seemed to pull him deeper into a truth he wasn't ready for. His secretary wasn't just a woman with secrets. She was a woman with burdens greater than he had ever known. Burdens she had chosen to shoulder alone. For the first time in years, Adrian felt a sting in his eyes. The billionaire, so used to seeing the world through contracts, profits, and power, was now seeing it through the quiet strength of a woman he thought he knew, and it shook him. The journey ended when Grace stopped before a dilapidated apartment building. Paint peeled from the walls, windows were patched with cardboard, and the stairwell light flickered weakly. She ushered the boy inside, her hand steady on his back. The door closed behind them with a hollow echo, leaving Adrian alone on the street. He stood there, staring up at the building, his heart pounding in his chest. The image of Grace's gentle touch on the boy's head replayed in his mind again and again. His world, built on steel and glass, felt suddenly fragile in the face of such raw humanity. In that moment, Adrian knew one thing with certainty. His life would never look the same again. The night bled into dawn, but Adrian could not sleep. He lay in his mansion's vast bedroom, surrounded by silk sheets and silent walls. Yet his mind returned to that cracked apartment door and the shadows inside it. Grace, his secretary, the woman he had thought so ordinary, so reserved, was carrying a secret so heavy it bent her entire life. By morning, he could not resist. He had to know more. At work, Grace entered the office as usual, her face composed, her hair neatly tied back. To anyone else, she was the picture of efficiency. But Adrian, with new eyes, noticed the faint tremor in her hand as she arranged the files, the tired slump of her shoulders. Grace, he said suddenly, his voice softer than usual. She looked up, startled. Yes, sir? His throat tightened. He wanted to ask her directly, but the words tangled. So he offered a stack of papers, masking his hesitation. Join me in the conference room. We need to review these. Inside the glass-walled room, the city sprawled below, bright and merciless. Grace sat opposite him, her back straight, waiting. He studied her face, searching for cracks in the mask she wore so well. Finally, he leaned forward. I followed you last night. The words dropped like stones. Grace froze. The color drained from her face, and for a long moment, silence stretched thin between them. You... What? She whispered. I saw you. Adrian pressed, his voice unsteady. I saw the boy, the woman, the groceries. I saw everything. Her composure was shattered. Her eyes darted toward the door, then back to him, as if weighing whether to flee or to fight. You had no right, she said, her voice sharp but trembling. That is my life, not your business. Adrian's chest ached. Grace, I did not follow you to judge. I followed because I did not understand you, but now I see. You have been carrying all of this alone. Her shoulders shook. She clasped her hands together on the table, trying to hold herself steady, but tears welled in her eyes. You do not know what it is like. Every morning I come here, smiling, answering phones, typing memos, while my son waits at home, while my mother fights to breathe. I cannot let anyone see me weak, because if they do, I lose everything. Her words cracked on the last syllable. Adrian leaned forward, his own voice breaking. Grace, why did you not tell me? Because you are my boss, she whispered bitterly. Because men like you see weakness and turn it into dismissal. Because I cannot risk it. I cannot risk him. Her tears spilled freely now. That boy is my son, Adrian. My son and my mother. She has only me. If I fail, they both lose everything. The revelation struck him harder than any boardroom defeat. Her son, not just a child she helped, her child. The truth shook the ground beneath him. Adrian pressed his palm against his eyes, fighting back his own tears. When he looked at her again, his voice was raw. You have been fighting battles I cannot imagine, and I sat here, in this office, blind. Grace, you are stronger than anyone I know. For the first time, she let herself crumble. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling with years of suppressed grief. Adrian reached across the table, hesitated, then placed his hand gently over hers. Let me help you, he whispered. Grace's head lifted slowly, her eyes red but fierce. No, she said, shaking her head. Help is a chain. People give with one hand and take with the other. I cannot afford to owe you, Adrian. Her defiance burned through her vulnerability, and Adrian felt both awe and despair. She would rather break herself than risk being trapped. Yet in her fire, he saw the truth. Grace was not just a woman surviving. She was a mother, a daughter, a warrior, and her fight was far from over. As she rose to leave, Adrian's heart pounded. The story was only beginning. Destiny had drawn back the curtain, but what lay beyond was darker and more dangerous than he imagined. And he knew he would not walk away. The weeks that followed were heavier for Grace than any she had known. Her mother's cough worsened, rattling through the thin apartment's walls at night, and the boy grew quieter, his laughter replaced by anxious silence. Grace carried herself with determination, but Adrian could see the cracks deepening. Each morning she arrived at the office with eyes rimmed in red. Each evening she left clutching her bag like a shield. Adrian tried to respect her wish for distance, but his heart would not allow him to stand idle. He found himself thinking less of board meetings and more of whether she had food at home. The numbers on his financial reports blurred before his eyes, replaced by the memory of her trembling shoulders in that conference room. Then, one evening, as the city thundered with a sudden storm, destiny struck. Grace was late leaving work, her umbrella broken in the wind, her clothes soaked as she rushed through the streets. Adrian, finishing a late call, noticed the desk empty and his gut twisted. He grabbed his coat and followed the route he now knew too well. When he arrived at the apartment building, chaos unfolded before him. A crowd had gathered, smoke coiled from the second floor, glowing orange in the storm's darkness. Shouts filled the air, neighbors screaming for water, for help. Adrian pushed through the throng, his chest tight. The sight that met him froze his blood. Grace stood in the doorway of the burning building, her face pale but fierce, clutching her son in her arms. Behind her, her mother's frail body lay limp against the stairwell, too weak to move. "Grace!" Adrian roared, charging forward. She looked up, her eyes wild. "I cannot leave her!" she cried, her voice raw with desperation. The smoke thickened, flames licking at the wooden banisters. Adrian did not think, did not measure risks. For the first time in his life, instinct overruled caution. He plunged into the fire, the heat searing his skin, his lungs filling with bitter smoke. He reached the stairwell just as Grace staggered, her strength failing. She had pushed her son toward the doorway, shielding him with her body, but her arms trembled violently as she tried to lift her mother. "Let me!" Adrian shouted, his hands gripping the frail woman's shoulders. Together, they carried her down, step by painful step, until the crowd outside surged forward, pulling them all into the open air. Rain poured down, hissing against the flames. Grace collapsed to her knees, cradling her mother's head, her son clinging to her waist. Her body shook with sobs, half from fear, half from relief. Adrian stood beside her, his chest heaving, his suit torn and blackened with soot. In that moment, something shifted. The billionaire who had once only chased profit had risked everything for a woman and her family. Grace lifted her tear-streaked face to him, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this? Why would you risk your life for us?" Adrian sank down beside her, his voice low but steady. "Because you taught me something I had forgotten, Grace. That wealth without love is nothing. That strength is not in power, but in sacrifice. You showed me what it means to fight for those you love. How could I stand by and watch you carry that alone?" For the first time, Grace let herself lean into his shoulder, her son still clinging to her, her mother breathing weakly but alive. In the crackling aftermath of fire and storm, a quiet promise formed between them, unspoken but powerful. The breaking point had come, and from its ashes, something new was being born. The fire had taken much, but it had not broken them. Weeks later, Grace's mother rested in a hospital bed, breathing easier with proper care, and her son returned to timid laughter, no longer haunted by fear. Adrian had made sure of it. His wealth, once a fortress of pride, had become a bridge to healing. Yet Grace remained cautious, her gratitude laced with distance. One afternoon, as the sun poured golden light into the hospital courtyard, Adrian arrived carrying a bouquet of lilies. He found Grace seated on a bench, her son leaning against her side, his head nestled in her lap. She looked up when Adrian approached, her eyes unreadable. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Grace nodded, sending her son to fetch a drink from the vending machine nearby. As the boy ran off, she folded her arms, her gaze steady. "Why are you doing all of this, Adrian? Why risk your name, your reputation, your fortune, for me?" Adrian sank onto the bench beside her, the flowers resting in his lap. He took a deep breath, words heavy on his tongue. "Because I was blind. All my life, I thought power and wealth defined me. But when I saw you, fighting alone, giving everything to those you love, I realized I had nothing compared to you. You taught me what strength really looks like." Her eyes softened, but suspicion lingered. "And what do you expect in return?" "Nothing," Adrian whispered. "Not your gratitude, not your love, only that you allow yourself to lean on someone, just once. You do not need to fight alone anymore." Grace turned her face away, tears shimmering in her lashes. For years, the walls she built had been her only defense. But here, with this man who had once been just her boss, those walls wavered. "My son," she murmured, "he deserves more than this life, more than me breaking my back until there is nothing left." Adrian's voice broke. "Then let me stand with you. Not as a chain, but as a shield. You gave me back my humanity, Grace. Let me give you peace." She closed her eyes, and for a long moment, silence stretched between them. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "I was wrong about you, Adrian. I thought you could never understand, but maybe you do." Her son returned, clutching a small bottle of juice, his smile wide as he spotted Adrian. Without hesitation, he reached out his small hand, offering it to him. Adrian accepted, the boy's fingers warm and fragile against his own. Grace watched, her heart breaking open and mending all at once. In that moment, she saw not a billionaire, not a boss, but a man who had chosen to carry the weight of love over the crown of wealth. The moral was clear. Power fades, riches crumble, but love and loyalty endure. And for the first time in years, Grace allowed herself to hope. And so, the story of Adrian and Grace closes, not with wealth or power, but with something far greater: compassion rediscovered, dignity restored, and hope rekindled. A billionaire who once believed his empire was built on numbers and steel found his true fortune in the quiet strength of a woman who had nothing but love to give. And a mother who once thought she was invisible discovered that even the smallest acts of sacrifice could ripple into the hearts of those who least expected it. But now, dear listener, the story does not end here. It continues with you. Think of the people around you, the ones who move silently through your days. The secretary who stays late after everyone else has gone home. The cleaner who polishes floors no one thanks them for. The driver who waits outside in the rain so someone else can be safe inside. How often do we look past them? How often do we forget that behind every tired face is a story, a struggle, and a heart that beats with dreams and fears just like ours? Adrian only understood this when he stepped out of his tower and into the shadows where Grace lived. He thought he was powerful, but he discovered she was stronger. He thought he was giving, but in truth, she was the one who gave him back his soul. And isn't that what so many of us forget? That kindness, when given freely, is more powerful than any fortune ever earned. So I ask you now, who in your life have you overlooked? Who deserves your gratitude, your kindness, your attention? Sometimes, the most extraordinary people wear the most ordinary masks, and if we dare to look closer, we may see miracles in their quiet courage. If this story touched you, let it not end as a tale you watched and forgot. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that wealth is not measured in money, but in love, loyalty, and compassion. Leave a comment below. Tell us about a time when someone's hidden struggles opened your eyes, or when a simple act of kindness changed your life. And if you want more stories that stir the heart, that remind us of what it truly means to be human, then subscribe. Each story here is more than entertainment. It is a mirror, a question, a call to awaken what we too often let sleep inside us. Like this video, share it with a friend, and let's spread this message together. Because every time one person chooses compassion over indifference, the world shifts, even if only by a heartbeat. Remember this: one day, the skyscrapers will fall, the empires will fade, and the wealth will scatter like dust in the wind. But love will remain. And perhaps, like Adrian, we too will realize that the greatest fortune we could ever find is not in what we own, but in the people we choose to stand beside. So, my friend, the story is yours now. Carry it forward, live it, share it, and never forget, every life around you holds a lesson if only you dare to see.